My own son thought I was finished. While I was recovering from major surgery, he had me sign papers that handed him my entire fortune. He and his mistress then made me a prisoner in my own home, screening my calls and telling my friends I was too sick to see them. They treated me like I was already dead, just a bank account to be drained before the funeral. But they forgot one thing: I was the one who taught my son how to play chess. And the final move I made was the most satisfying surgical checkmate of my life, ensuring they would never see a single penny again. Coming home from the hospital is a strange sort of dislocation. You're back in a familiar space, but you feel like a stranger in it, and an even bigger stranger in your own body. My son Aiden had arranged a small welcome home gathering for me in my own living room. The sentiment was meant to be sweet, I suppose, but the air was thick with a cloying falseness that I could practically taste. Aiden was playing the part of the doting son with an almost theatrical flair, constantly fluffing my pillows, touching my arm, and speaking to me in that soft, slow voice people use when they think you've lost your marbles. And then there was Sloane. He introduced her as his personal assistant, but the way she moved through my house, her smile as brittle and thin as spun sugar, told a different story. I watched them from the depths of my favorite armchair, a queen on a throne of pillows observing my court of two. I saw the way Aiden's eyes kept flicking to his expensive Rolex, a nervous tick that betrayed his performance of calm. I saw how Sloane rearranged the silver-framed photos on my mantelpiece with a familiarity that felt like a trespass. And whenever I tried to bring up something of substance like the hospital bills or the quarterly taxes, they would expertly steer the conversation back to my comfort, my rest, my health. It was a masterful, suffocating dance of deflection. That performance set the stage for the days that followed. The charade of care became a campaign of control. My son and his assistant decided I needed to be protected from stress, which apparently meant I needed to be protected from my own life. They began screening my calls with Sloane's polite, firm voice, informing my friends that I was simply too tired for visitors. My oldest friend from the garden club, a woman I'd spoken to every week for 40 years, was turned away at the digital gates. The Daily Mail, once a small pleasure, was now intercepted by Aiden, who would sort through it under the guise of organizing my affairs. He even hired a new caregiver, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Patty, whose main job, I quickly deduced, was to report my every move and word back to him. My home, the beautiful Westchester house my late husband and I had built together, the place that held every memory I cherished, stopped feeling like a sanctuary. It became a gilded cage, and I, its well-cared-for prisoner. About a week into this new, suffocating reality, Aiden came to me with a thick leather portfolio. He sat on the ottoman before me, his expression a careful blend of filial concern and business-like efficiency. He explained that these were just some routine updates to the estate portfolio, some standard authorizations for the corporate accounts to make it easier for him to manage things while I recuperated. He fanned the papers out, a dizzying sea of fine print that my tired eyes couldn't possibly focus on. He spoke in a smooth, reassuring murmur, the words washing over me designed to soothe, not to inform. He pointed to a signature line on one of the pages, his thumb strategically covering the dense paragraph above it. He told me to just sign here, that it was an authorization for him to pay my bills online, so much easier than writing checks. A weariness had settled deep in my bones, a profound exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. All I wanted was for the conversation to be over, for him to leave me in peace. So with a hand that trembled slightly, I signed. I signed where he pointed. I didn't know it then, but in that moment of weary surrender, I had handed my son the keys to my entire kingdom. Sleep didn't come easily in that house anymore. The silence felt different, heavier. One night, I found myself wandering the darkened halls, my bare feet silent on the old wood floors. As I passed Aiden's study, the one my husband had used for decades, I saw a sliver of light under the door. And then I heard his voice. It was his voice, yes, but it was a version I hadn't heard in years, not since he was a teenager in serious trouble. The smooth, charming veneer was gone, stripped away, to reveal something raw, sharp, and laced with pure panic. He was hissing into the phone a venomous, desperate whisper. He said that the transfer had to happen by Friday, that the hospital stay had wiped out the liquid cash. He mentioned the new authorization, my authorization, and how the bank was putting a 72-hour hold on large withdrawals. He told the person on the other end to just tell them they'll get their money, that the whole deal would collapse if they pulled out. I shrank back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding, a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The mask wasn't just off. It had been obliterated. And in that horrifying moment of clarity, all the pieces of the past few weeks, the fake smiles, the isolation, the condescending care, the stack of documents slammed together. This wasn't concern. This wasn't protection. This was a coup. After a night spent staring into the darkness where the shadows of betrayal danced with the memories of a little boy who once trusted me with everything, I woke with a cold, hard clarity in my veins. The grief was still there, a leaden weight in my chest, but alongside it was something else, a warrior's resolve. I knew I couldn't fight them with force. My body was too weak for that. But my mind, sharpened by a lifetime of observation, was a weapon they had forgotten I possessed. So the next morning, when Sloane brought my breakfast tray, I wore my frailty like a cloak. I looked up at her, my expression deliberately vacant and confused. Her smile was as bright and phony as a plastic flower. I waited until she had fussed with my pillows before speaking, my voice soft and thin. I asked her about the deal Aiden had mentioned on the phone the night before. I told her I was so hoping to hear more about his new tech investment, that my late husband was always so proud of his business acumen. I aimed every word directly at her, the weakest link in the chain, and I saw the bait land perfectly. Her smile didn't just falter. It shattered. For a split second, I saw pure panic in her eyes before she scrambled to reassemble her composure. She stammered something about it being very promising, a big software launch. She couldn't get out of the room fast enough. Later that afternoon, I orchestrated my next move. I asked Aiden to help me with a book on a high shelf, waiting until Sloane was also in the room. As he stood beside me, I looked at him with feigned admiration. I told him Sloane had been telling me all about his big software launch. The effect was immediate. Aiden froze his hand still on the bookshelf. He shot Sloane a look of pure venom before forcing a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. He told me it wasn't software. No, it was a new real estate venture, far more stable. He said Sloane must have misunderstood. The air in the room grew thick and heavy with their clumsy, contradictory lies. They stood there trapped in a web of their own making, looking at each other, not like partners, but like co-conspirators whose stories had just unraveled. Their guilt was no longer a suspicion. It was a palpable thing, a third person in the room with us. I knew then that I needed to get a message out. My caregiver, Patty, was diligent. But diligence breeds routine, and every routine has a weakness. I noticed that every single day at precisely 3:15 in the afternoon, she would step out onto the back patio for a 5-minute cigarette break, always leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I spent 2 days just watching, confirming the pattern. On the third day, I made my move. Feigning a nap, I listened for the slide of the patio door. The moment it clicked shut, I was up. My heart hammered against my ribs as I moved to the kitchen. Her phone was right where I knew it would be. My fingers, though stiff with age, flew across the screen. I sent a short cryptic text to Arthur, my lawyer for over 30 years. Arthur, code red, my father's old chess set. Need to review the rules. Marion. It was a distress signal we had established a decade ago, back when a competitor tried to stage a hostile takeover of my husband's company. My father's old chess set meant my assets were under attack from within. I hit send, deleted the message from her history, and was back in my chair, eyes closed, just as I heard the patio door slide open again. A lifeline had been cast. My small, quiet probe triggered a massive, clumsy overreaction. It seemed my single question had sent Aiden into a spiral of paranoia. By the end of the week, new locks appeared on the doors, smart locks he could control from his phone. The internet router was suddenly moved into his locked study. He had a long, serious talk with Patty, and afterwards, she regretfully informed me that Aiden had insisted I avoid using the phone or computer. He was worried, she said, with that relentlessly cheerful smile about me falling victim to online scams. The pretense of gentle care was dissolving, replaced by the cold, hard reality of undisguised oppression. The bars of my gilded cage were no longer gilded. They were made of steel. I realized then that I had poked a cornered animal. My son's theft wasn't born from simple greed, but from a desperation so profound it was making him reckless. And that I knew made him infinitely more dangerous. I was no longer just a victim of a quiet betrayal. I was a prisoner, and my warden was terrified. When you've provoked a cornered animal, the last thing you should do is advance. You retreat. You make yourself small. You play dead. And that's exactly what I did. Understanding that any direct confrontation would be disastrous, I began a performance worthy of the stage. I leaned into the role they had assigned me, the frail, confused matriarch. I started forgetting things, a conversation we'd just had Patty the caregiver's name. I would look at Aiden with a clouded expression and thank him profusely for taking care of everything, my voice trembling with a gratitude that was pure theater. I saw the tension drain from his shoulders day by day. He and Sloane would exchange small, relieved smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. They believed their little panic was a one-time flare-up, that my sharp questions had been the last sparks from a dying fire. They thought they had won, that the old woman had finally succumbed to her age and condition. Their relief was my shield, and their arrogance was my opportunity. While my body was a prisoner, my mind was free to work. I spent my days piecing together the fragments I had, the panicked phone call, the lies about the deal, the sheer amount of money that would cause such terror. Though I wouldn't learn the full, sordid details until much later, my imagination, fueled by a lifetime of knowing my son's desperate need for status, painted a grim and accurate picture. I could see him in his leased glass-walled office, not as the titan of industry he pretended to be, but as a terrified imposter staring at numbers glowing blood red on a screen. I pictured the origin of it all, a bad investment, probably in some flashy biotech startup that promised the world and delivered nothing. Then the first loan from my accounts to cover the loss, a secret he thought he could manage. But those things are never manageable. The borrowing must have become a hemorrhage, a systematic siphoning of my legacy to prop up his fragile image. I could practically feel the cold dread of threatening emails from private lenders, the kind of men who don't care about excuses. And Sloane, she wasn't a lovesick fool. I imagined their meetings not passionate trysts, but tense business arrangements where she took her cut to wash my money through her own fake company. My son wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a boy in a suit, drowning in a sea of his own lies. The opportunity I was waiting for came on a Saturday night. Aiden and Sloane were attending some charity gala an event essential for maintaining the very illusion that was bankrupting them. I watched them leave, dripping with false success, and my performance began. I told Patty I was feeling utterly exhausted and was going to bed early. I waited listening from my room until I heard the familiar sound of the television in the living room, a clear sign that my jailer was settled in for the night. Then I moved. In the hallway stood the old grandfather clock, a wedding gift from my parents. Taped to the back where no one would ever look was a small, cold key. It opened the one room Aiden had locked my late husband's study. The click of the lock felt like a shot of adrenaline. Inside, the air was still smelling of old books and leather. I went straight to my husband's desk and retrieved his hidden arsenal. He was a man who believed in contingencies. There it was, a simple pay-as-you-go burner phone he'd insisted I keep for emergencies. Beside it, a leather-bound ledger containing the passwords to 2 secondary investment accounts Aiden knew nothing about. And beneath that, the original unaltered corporate documents for the family trust. I was no longer a victim. I was an operative, armed and ready. Believing me to be utterly defeated and sedated in my room, Aiden had grown careless. His arrogance was a blinding fog. He had been working in the study before leaving and had left his laptop on the desk, open and sleeping. My touch on the trackpad brought the screen to life. And there it was. An email he'd been reviewing, a wire transfer confirmation from my primary investment account. $100,000 sent to Sloan Consulting, LLC. The memo line contained just 2 words, consulting fee. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up the burner phone and took a clear, damning photograph of the screen. He had just handed me the first piece of hard, irrefutable evidence. He was so convinced of my weakness, so blinded by his own desperate ambition, that he couldn't see the woman who had taught him how to play chess. He had forgotten the most important rule: you never ever underestimate your opponent. His arrogance, I knew then, would be his ruin. For 2 days I waited. Armed with my secrets, I continued my performance, a ghost in my own home, watching and listening. I had sent my message to Arthur, my knight, and now all I could do was wait for him to cross the board. The wait ended on a Tuesday afternoon. The air in the house was stale with tension. Aiden was agitated, constantly checking his phone, the end-of-the-month deadline undoubtedly looming in his mind. Sloan was jumpy, dropping a glass in the kitchen and then bursting into tears. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read when the doorbell chimed. Its clear, simple sound cut through the oppressive atmosphere like a judge's gavel. Sloan went to answer it, and a moment later, I heard her sharp intake of breath. A man in a severe, perfectly tailored suit stood in the doorway. It was Arthur. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, holding up a single, crisp document. He informed Sloan that he had a court order granting him a private consultation with his client, Marion Hale, and that she had 5 minutes to vacate the room. Aiden, summoned by Sloan's panicked expression, came rushing in from his study, his face a mask of blustering indignation. He started protesting about my health, about my need for rest, that this was an intrusion. Arthur didn't even grant him a glance. He walked past my son as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed only on me. He stopped before my chair, and his stern expression softened into one of genuine warmth. He told me it was good to see me, and that he believed we needed to review the rules of the game. With his arrival, the invisible walls of my prison crumbled to dust. Aiden's control over the environment, so absolute just a moment before, had completely evaporated. We sat in the living room, Arthur and I on the sofa, Aiden and Sloan perched awkwardly on chairs opposite us, a tangible air of dread radiating from them. Arthur didn't bother with pleasantries. He reached into his briefcase and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table between us. It was a copy of the bank statement, the one I had photographed showing the transfer of $100,000 from my account to Sloan's company. Arthur let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. before he looked directly at Aiden. His voice was calm, devoid of emotion, which made his words all the more devastating. He explained that this was a clear case of wire fraud. He mentioned that it was a federal offense. He finished by stating the sentencing guidelines 10 to 20 years. This was a language Aiden understood. It wasn't an emotional appeal or a moral judgment. It was a cold, hard professional threat, a weapon against which his charm and entitlement were utterly useless. My son's facade didn't just crack, it instantly disintegrated. He didn't rage, he didn't deny. He imploded. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, ugly sob that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. And then it all came out. The confession wasn't a river. It was a sewer, disgorging years of filth and fear. He confessed the disastrous biotech investments, the mountain of debt, the terrifying private lenders who were threatening to ruin him. He confessed the years of borrowing, the systematic theft, the profound terror of being exposed as a failure. He laid bare his entire hidden history, not out of a shred of remorse, but out of the pure, selfish animal fear of consequence. Sloane watched this pathetic display with wide, horrified eyes. As Aiden's confession implicated her more and more, her fear curdled into a desperate need for self-preservation. The moment he paused for breath, she shrieked that he had told her it was an authorized investment, that she was a victim in all of this. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to leap from the sinking ship. But Aiden, in his broken state, was beyond protecting anyone. He turned on her, his face a mess of tears and fury. He screamed back at her, asking how she could be a victim when she took 30% of every fraudulent transfer. He spat out that it was her idea in the first place to use the power of attorney, that she was the one who drafted the consulting agreement to make it look legitimate. Their conspiracy, their partnership fractured and dissolved in a matter of seconds, replaced by the frantic squealing panic of two people trying to shove the other under the bus to save themselves. The illusion of their sophisticated partnership was gone, revealing the ugly truth: two desperate amateurs now turning on each other with a viciousness born of terror. Throughout this entire ugly scene, I had remained silent, watching it all unfold with a strange, cold, surgical detachment. It was like watching a play for which I already knew the ending. The chaos reached a fever pitch, their accusations flying back and forth, and I decided it was time for the curtain to fall. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. I simply said, "That's enough." The words spoken without anger or volume sliced through the hysteria, and the room fell instantly silent. They both stared at me, their faces stained with tears and shock. I could feel the power in the room shift, flowing away from their chaotic panic and consolidating around my stillness. I was no longer the frail victim, the confused old woman in the armchair. I was in complete command. I looked at my son, at the wreck of a man he had become. I told him that he would be at Arthur's office tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. I told him he would bring Sloane. I ordered them not to speak to anyone about what had happened, and that from this moment forward, they would do exactly as they were told. I finished by saying that the game was over. It was my turn now. The power had irrevocably shifted. They were left staring at me, their fear of exposure now eclipsed by a new, far more potent terror, the terror of not knowing what I, the woman they had so completely underestimated, was about to do to them. The walk into Arthur's office the next morning was silent. Aiden and Sloane looked like ghosts, hollowed out by fear and a sleepless night. They followed me into the conference room, a cold, impersonal space of glass and polished mahogany, and I saw the flicker of confusion on their faces when they saw we were not alone. They were expecting a family legal battle. I had arranged a public execution. Seated at the long table were two other people. The first was Mr. Hemlock, a man in his late 70s, who had been my husband's financial advisor and friend for 40 years. He represented the legacy of trust and integrity my son had betrayed. The second was a woman named Evelyn Vance, a senior partner from one of the most ruthless public relations firms in New York City. She represented the public image the precious brand Aiden had killed for. Aiden's face went pale. He understood immediately that this was not a trial about money. It was a trial about his very identity. I did not speak. I simply nodded to Arthur, who took his place at the head of the table. What followed was not a heated argument, but a surgical presentation, a methodical dismantling of my son's entire world. Arthur began by laying out the fraudulent power of attorney, its signature, a testament to a moment of my weakness and his deception. Next came the bank statements, a clear, damning trail of money flowing from my accounts. Then Arthur placed a glossy photograph on the table, the picture I had taken of Aiden's laptop screen, showing the $100,000 transfer to Sloan. Aiden stared at it, his last shred of deniability gone. Finally, Arthur placed a small, black digital recorder on the polished table. He explained that earlier that morning, I had a private conversation with Sloan. I had told her I needed to understand everything if I was going to help her a final calculated lie. Arthur pressed play. The room filled with Sloane's terrified voice, confessing the entire money laundering scheme in excruciating detail. Dates, amounts her 30%, cut all in a desperate, pathetic bid for my mercy. It was the final, elegant checkmate. The true punishment. The blow that I knew would land with the most devastating force came not from me, but from the two silent observers. Mr. Hemlock, who had known Aiden since he was a boy, looked at him not with anger, but with a profound and weary disappointment that was somehow much worse. He spoke of the 40 years he had managed the Hale family legacy, a legacy built on my husband's hard work and honor. He said that to see Aiden treat that legacy with such utter contempt was a tragedy. He simply shook his head, and in that small gesture, Aiden was excommunicated from the world of his father. Then Miss Vance spoke. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, a clinical diagnosis of a terminal disease. She told Aiden that his brand, the image he had so desperately curated, was built on integrity and success. This story, she explained, the embezzlement from his sick mother. The fraud, the sordid affair, wasn't just a crisis. It was, in her words, an extinction-level event. She looked him right in the eye and told him he was now radioactive. This judgment, delivered not by his mother, but by the high priestess of the world he worshipped, was the blow that finally and utterly broke him. He didn't cry this time. He just sat there, hollowed out, erased by the very people he had tried so desperately to impress. The room was silent. The execution was complete. Arthur slid a thick stack of documents across the table until they rested in front of me. He said quietly that they were ready, just as we had discussed. While my son watched numb and vacant, I picked up the heavy, expensive pen. There was no anger in my hand, only purpose. I was not a vengeful mother lashing out. I was a protector, a guardian of my husband's legacy, performing a necessary, painful surgery. I signed the first document formally and irrevocably revoking the power of attorney. I signed the second, removing him as the executor of my will and my husband's estate. Then I paused and looked at him one last time before signing the final set of papers. With each steady, deliberate stroke of the pen, I formally and completely disinherited him. The document stipulated that the entirety of the Hale family fortune, every stock, every property, every dollar, would be placed into a new charitable trust, one I had established in my husband's name, dedicated to providing legal advocacy for the elderly who have suffered from financial abuse. He had lost everything, not in a storm of shouting or a flood of tears, but in the quiet, methodical silence of a conference room with the calm, precise, and permanent stroke of a pen. The silence in the conference room after they left was absolute. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war is over. The fallout, I was told, was as swift and brutal as Ms. Vance had predicted. Her firm released a masterfully worded statement to the financial press about the strategic restructuring of the Hale Family Trust, a move designed to realign its mission with elder advocacy. It was corporate jargon for a surgical execution. The statement didn't mention Aiden by name, but it didn't have to. The right people understood. Within a week, his lines of credit were frozen. His business, built on an image of family money and success, imploded like a dying star. The leased cars, the gleaming props of his fraudulent life, were quietly repossessed. His membership at the exclusive Westchester Country Club was revoked. He was forced to leave his luxury apartment, his name suddenly toxic among the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. Sloan, facing her own legal troubles and armed with a plea deal Arthur had arranged in exchange for her full cooperation, simply disappeared, leaving Aiden utterly alone to face the ruins of the life he had built on my money. In the months that followed, I learned of their divergent paths, two souls cast out from my life, now navigating their new realities. Arthur told me that Sloan had moved to a different state to start over. A few weeks after the meeting, a short handwritten letter arrived at Arthur's office, which he passed on to me. In it, she offered a simple, unqualified apology for her part in the deception. It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. It was a small, quiet flicker of accountability. Aiden, on the other hand, remained a ghost. I heard through the grapevine that he was working some sort of menial sales job, living in a small, rented room. The arrogance that had been his defining feature was gone, replaced, I was told, by a hollowed-out shame. About 6 months after the meeting, he tried to call me. I saw his name flash on my screen, and I let it ring until it went to voicemail. The message he left wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to understand or to atone. He told me he was in trouble, that he just needed a little money to get back on his feet. In that moment, I knew with a painful certainty that he still didn't understand the depth of his betrayal. He hadn't learned a thing. I deleted the message and never heard from him again. Freed from the burden of my son's deception, I found that my own life began to blossom. The first thing I did was sell the large Westchester house. It was a beautiful home, but it had become a symbol of my imprisonment, its memory tainted. I sold it and bought a beautiful, light-filled apartment in the city, with a balcony overlooking the park. It felt like shedding an old, heavy skin. I reconnected with my friends from the garden club, the ones Sloan had so efficiently cut me off from. We had long lunches and went to the theater, and I felt a part of myself that had long been dormant reawaken. My most important work, however, was with the new trust. I took a seat on the board of the Hale Trust for Elder Advocacy. My sharp mind, the one my son had dismissed as old and failing, was now my greatest asset. I poured my energy and my husband's legacy into helping others, using my resources to fund legal aid for seniors who had been tricked, betrayed, and silenced. I was no longer just a mother or a widow. I was a protector, a philanthropist, and finally, after 71 years, the sole and undisputed master of my own destiny. The final piece of my old life fell away about a year after that day in the conference room. I was having lunch with Arthur at a bustling outdoor cafe. We had become dear friends, partners in my liberation. I was laughing, truly laughing, a sound that felt both new and familiar when I saw him across the street. It was Aiden. He looked older, tired, and completely anonymous, just another face in the endless river of the city. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In his, I saw a flicker of shame and something that might have been regret. In my own, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering love. Only a quiet, settled finality like a book that has been closed and put away on a high shelf. He quickly looked away, hunching his shoulders as he disappeared into the crowd. I turned back to Arthur, who gave me a knowing, gentle smile. I smiled back, and in that moment, I understood the nature of my victory. It wasn't about his ruin or my revenge. It was about this, the simple, profound peace of a sunny afternoon, shared with a true friend, my heart full, not with what I had lost, but with everything I had built in its place. In the end, Marion Hale's victory wasn't measured by her son's ruin, but by her own quiet peace. She learned that a family is not a name you inherit, but a bond of trust that once shattered sometimes requires a painful surgery. By turning her personal pain into a public shield for others, she didn't just reclaim her fortune. She redefined her legacy. Her son was left with the hollow weight of his choices, while she built a new life from the ashes, proving that true strength is found not in the battles we win, but in the purpose we create afterward.